Awesome. Thank you. So we are recording now. Thank you for being here today for appropriate uses of AI for qualitative research. This is hosted by I need to make sure I can see the full description here because I always forget what we're standing for, but the Qualitative Social Sciences and Humanities Data Interest Group of iAssist, as well as the Professional Development Committee. My name is Jess Hagman. I am one of the leadership group members of the CAQDAS group. And we are delighted to be kicking off our workshop series on qualitative research technology, and very, very happy to have with us today Dr. Christina Silver from the University of Surrey, where she's Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology, as well as the Director of the CAQDAS Networking Project. So who better to start off our workshop series than someone who has done extensive research and training in qualitative data analysis technology for many years and is very well familiar with this kind of burgeoning area of AI for research and qualitative work. I am going to start us off with a quick introduction to iAssist for those of you who may be new to this group, and then I will turn it over to Christina. So iAssist is the International Association of Social Science, Information Service and Technology. We are folks from across many different disciplines and types of work, so academic, government, nonprofit, even commercial organization. If you're interested in joining, we do have the link there for iassistdata.org. Membership is only $60 a year. There is a discount fee, I believe, for those in developing countries. And with membership, you get access to our discussion list, as well as you can become involved in our committees and interest groups and all sorts of things like that. Many of the folks in iAssist right now are involved in the data rescue project, which is preserving data that has been removed from government websites in the US. Many of you are probably aware that this is an ongoing issue right now. Given the political situation, we've had a lot of data has been removed, but there are very many people involved in making sure that data is saved and for future use. If you're interested in that, you can go to datarescue.org. This is the project of iAssist as well as a number of other data-related organizations in the US. We are also getting ready to host our 50th conference coming up in June. It will be at the University of the West of England in Bristol. Registration is now open. The theme this year is Bridging Oceans, Harboring Data, and Anchoring the Future. I went to my first iAssist conference last year in Canada, and it was one of the best conferences I've ever been to. So if you happen to be in the area or are needing a trip, I highly recommend. And this workshop recording will be available on our YouTube channel, which is just iAssist. You can search iAssist on YouTube. So you'll be able to get it there after this session. And I believe, just a quick note, we will have a number of additional workshops coming up, but I'll bring this back up again at the end of our session. So I will turn it over to Christina before I have a quick housekeeping. We do have a Q&A set up. So if you have a question for Christina as we go through, please use the Q&A function so we can keep an eye on that. But you're also welcome to use the chat for discussion if you'd like to maybe share a link or kind of respond to, it would be good to have a sort of discussion today. I think that's what Christina is aiming for. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to her.
I think I've managed to share the right screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for the invitation to present this session today. And it's really awesome to see so many people here. I know it's a real hot topic, thinking about the role and use of AI in qualitative research. As Jess said, I'd really like to get some conversation going about this. There's quite a lot of discourses flying around, quite a lot of hype, and also a little bit of concern around these topics. So let's use today as a way to discuss these issues and think about them collectively. You can see all my contact details up there, and the slides will be made available to you as a PDF as well, so that you can refer back to them at any point afterwards. And do connect with me. I share quite a lot of resources around these topics on various platforms. So whatever your preferred social media platform, you can probably find me there. The ones I use most often these days are Blue Sky and LinkedIn, probably, but other ones I still have a presence. Okay, let's get going straight away. And actually, I'd like to start off thinking a little bit about what your thoughts are. So as I mentioned earlier, this topic of AI in qualitative research is quite a diversive topic, actually. There's quite a lot of strong feelings. So I'm interested to know whether you're skeptical about using AI for qualitative research. Maybe you're worried about some of the potential dangers for doing that, or maybe you're really keen. Maybe you've already been using these tools. Maybe you're an advocate. You're really excited by the possibilities for the practice of qualitative research and qualitative data analysis. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle. Maybe you're not really sure what's going on in this field at the moment. Maybe that's one of the reasons why you're here today. Maybe you feel like you need to know a little bit more before making an informed decision. So I'd like to just very quickly ask you to click on the link that I've just popped into the chat, which basically just asks you one question just to get a sense of the temperature in the room here today. It's always interesting to hear what people think. So I'll just give you a moment or two to do that. And then we'll have a look at those responses fairly quickly. Whilst you're doing that, just to give you a little bit of an overview of the topics that we're going to be covering today, we're going to be, first of all, thinking about, okay, what's going on in this space? So I'm going to map the landscape of AI tools for qualitative research first, and then we're going to move on and really start thinking about, well, okay, if we do think it might be appropriate to use these kinds of tools for our qualitative research and analysis, how do we do that appropriately? And I want to do that by focusing on particular capabilities. And then if you want to try out tools after the workshop, we had initially thought that we might do some hands-on work together, but there's so many of you that that's probably not going to work today. But I have got some links there that allow you to try a few different tools out later if that's useful for you. All right, before we go any further, let's see if we can, that's not what I wanted to show, but let's see if we can get to the responses. Okay, we've got 94 responses so far. Can I make that bigger on my screen? So, oh, interesting. So just over a third of you so far, maybe some more responses will come in as we're looking at this. So about a third of you are quite excited, a few really excited, but not very many. But there's also a little bit of skepticism in the room, and also quite a few of you who are a little bit unsure. So that's really helpful. Thank you. I've been asking this question in many of the sessions I've done over the last couple of years. So it's really great to see, as you can see, quite a lot of difference in how you're feeling about that. So later on at the end of the session, I'll ask you a couple of questions as well, and then we can make some comparisons. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that. All right, let's go back then and get on with our topic today. And just as another little reminder, as Jess said, I'm very happy to take questions as they occur to you. So I will be keeping my eye on the Q&A space if you have a question, and I will try to answer them as they occur. But we'll also have some time at the end for some more questions and some discussion. But I want to start off thinking a little bit about traditions of tools for the analysis of text. So text, of course, is only one form of qualitative data, but it's a very commonly used form, whether it's transcripts of interviews, focus groups, or any other kind of textual material. And I think it's worth really thinking about the tools that we're now seeing come into our space in the context of traditions of tools more generally, because we've had tools that can help us analyze text and also other forms of qualitative data, visual materials, for a long time. And there's basically three sort of genres, if you like. So first of all, we've got computational linguistics, which tends to sit historically more on the quantitative end of the methodological spectrum. So is often about applying computer science techniques to the analysis and synthesis of language and also speech. So looking at words themselves and how words occur together to make understanding happen. So it's often about parts of speech, pronouns, nouns, adjectives, and so on, and applying statistical measures to look at words and the order in which they occur in language. And that's a tradition that historically came out of linguistics. And alongside that, we had the tradition of sort of text mining, exploratory ways of looking at texts, which also applied natural language processing and used various different supervised and unsupervised machine learning techniques for the rapid extraction of topics, themes, and patterns in textual material. So those are both sitting more towards the quantitative end of the methodological spectrum. And alongside that, we had sentiment analysis, automatic document classification, things like that. What many of us are probably working within is more of this sort of interpretive qualitative analysis space. And that's where many of the tools that you might be familiar with as qualitative researchers derived from the 1980s. So I'm talking about things like NVivo, MaxQDA, Transana, those sorts of tools were also evolving in a kind of third stream, if you like. Okay, and over time, some of the tools that we initially saw, particularly in the text mining space, were coming into the interpretive qualitative analysis space. So we've had tools for helping us analyze these materials for a long time. Now, these days, when people say AI, they tend to be referring to the generative AI capabilities that have come from the large language models. But there were forms of machine learning which have previously been referred to as AI. And actually, the term AI, artificial intelligence, has a number of different definitions. And so we need to distinguish a little bit between the more traditional AI capabilities, which tended to sit in those first two streams I mentioned, and the large language models that we've seen with the capabilities that have come out of that with generative AI. And what I want you to really be aware of is that the qualitative research space, the interpretive qualitative analysis space, has been impacted by various of these types of AI. In terms of the actual specific history, I would be interested to hear in the chat whether you've been using tools like MaxQDA, AtlasTI, Transana, Quirkos. There's many of them. Let me know in the chat which of those tools you're used to using, or indeed if it's none. It's interesting to know. But those tools first became available from the mid-1980s. So that's a long time ago now, isn't it? And actually, what we always used to say at the beginning in those early days is that there's those software programs, NVivo and so on, Deduce, I can see coming up in the chat. There's lots of other ones there. We've historically always said that those tools are not doing any analysis for us. They are holding our data, so they are connectors to and containers for our data and our analysis. But that was only really fully true up until about 1999. The first intelligent tools became available at that point with a program called Qualrus, which is not available anymore, but Qualrus allowed, using natural language processing, allowed the tool to suggest codes to us as humans. So you could select, let's say, a sentence of text, and the program would look at those strings of words and suggest potential codes. And you, as the human researcher, could either say, no, that's not a relevant code, or yes, that's a useful code. And Qualrus would learn based on the decisions that you made. And so since that time, we've had these various ways in which tools are actually helping us with our analysis. And many, as I mentioned before, of the qualitative software programs, CAQDAS programs, they're often referred to, that you're mentioning in the chat, many of those started to incorporate those tools between that time, 1999 and November 2022, when everything changed with the release of ChatGPT from OpenAI. And since that point, we've seen a very rapid interest in the use of tools for qualitative analysis, far beyond what we saw before, from a range of different sectors and disciplines and methods, and the kind of mushrooming of the availability of tools. And it's really that that I'm here to talk about specifically today. But I think it's really important to contextualize those developments in the last couple of years in relation to the history, because we have had a lot of tools available for a long time that haven't necessarily been used, whereas now everybody's starting to get more excited about the tools. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a think about the capabilities that are afforded by large language models and the generative AI tools that come from them. And if you're not really very familiar with how large language models themselves work, I would really highly recommend this web page here. You can see the link. It's coming from the FT, the Financial Times, and it's a very visual and very helpful description of how large language models actually work. And it's really important to remember, of course, that large language models are language models. They're not knowledge models, they are language models. And what they basically do is they break down text into what's called tokens, which are parts of words. And then they look at those tokens and they based on the models and the new technology, which allows the models to understand the relationship between words, not only in a linear sequence, but in relation to all of the other words, which is called self-attention. That is the probabilistic statistical capabilities, which have really transformed what we can now do with language. So it's really important to understand how large language models work before you start to think about, okay, what can I do with that capability in terms of my qualitative analysis? So do go and check out that website if you're not familiar with that. But what we can do, basically, there are 5 sort of broad capabilities that we're going to think about today. So first of all, the generate capability. This is generative AI, so it's able to generate things for us. And in the context of our qualitative research, we can generate ideas for projects. And we can also create data. So we'll think about that a little bit. We can also converse, of course, the chat in ChatGPT and other similar tools is all about the idea that we can converse, we can have a dialogue, we can have a conversation, we can ask questions about our qualitative materials via this chat interface. We can also summarize. Summarizing is a very powerful capability of large language models. And in the context of what we might want to do as qualitative researchers, this allows us to very quickly reduce data by condensing it in relation to the form of the text. And other things we can do are convert. So the classic conversion that's relevant to qualitative research is converting audio or video recordings into written text that we can then analyze in the form of a transcript. But there may be other ways that conversion will occur in the future as well. And then finally, we're going to think a little bit about labeling. So I'm guessing that many of you will be familiar with the idea of qualitative coding in your projects. And qualitative coding is a form of labeling, but we can also label our materials to categorize the content as well. And so these large language models have affordances or capabilities around those topics. So what I'm going to do today is to go through those and think about them in more detail in terms of our appropriate uses of them in qualitative research. But before we get on to that level of detail, I think it's really, really important to just say a few words about the ethical issues of using these kinds of technologies for qualitative research. Now, we could spend the whole of our time together talking about these. I'm just going to outline a few of the key ethical issues as I see them in the context of qualitative research. And at the end of the slides, there are some links where you can go and find out more about this. But in terms of ethics, we need to think about the development of the large language models and also the impacts of our use of these models in environmental and societal terms. So in terms of the development of large language models, there's various things to consider. So you may be aware that there's various litigation going on at the moment in the United States and elsewhere around the idea that the data that these models are trained on was stolen and is the humans who generated that data in the first place didn't consent and also haven't been compensated for the use of their data. And how do we feel as qualitative researchers to know that the models have been created in that way? So there's an issue around exploitation there that's really important to be aware of, but also exploitation of human annotators who were involved in the fine-tuning of the models. There's also quite a lot known about exploitation in that sense as well. And then there's also the idea of model collapse, which is the idea that as the models develop, they are being trained on more and more data. But as models generate new data, those new data are then incorporated in the models as well. So you get a kind of cyclical element there. And that can cause some big issues in terms of the models themselves. So there's at least those things to think about in terms of the development of the large language models in the first place. If we do decide to use them for our qualitative research purposes or any other purposes, then of course we have to think about the implications of our use. And there are some significant environmental implications for asking questions of these models, for example. And those environmental costs, for example, the amount of energy that is used to run the models, the amount of water that is used to cool down the data centers and so on. And also the idea that those costs are not equally distributed across the world. So that's a really important issue to think about in terms of who is using these tools and who is being negatively affected by their use, and that's not an equal distribution. So as well as things like bias, I'm sure you've been aware of the bias that is inherent in the models themselves. There's also those issues as well. So I just think it's really, really important not to put our heads in the sand about these ethical issues. And certainly, as I've learned more and more about this over the years, I have become much more much more careful about what I'm using large language models for and what I choose not to use them for. So, for example, I would never use a large language model to generate an image because I think there's plenty of images out there, and I don't think for myself it's an appropriate use of a tool. So I'm very much more careful now about how I'm using these tools. All right. In terms of qualitative research more generally, the issue that often comes up has to do with data privacy and security. The question that I can see in the Q&A, I'm going to attend to that on this slide, I think, actually. So I'll come to that in a moment, but thank you for the question. So data privacy and security in terms of our data itself is really, really important, because when we're doing qualitative research, we are not always, but often we are using data that has come from real people. Okay, so we have to respect their privacy and think about the rights of those human participants and their expectations around what we do with personally identifiable data. Okay, and then also the security of that data. So where does that data go? And are we sure that the data is not being used for unauthorized purposes? And as soon as we start using large language models and generative AI to facilitate an aspect of our analysis or our qualitative research, we are uploading that data, and therefore the issues around privacy and security become much more significant. So if you're going to use any tool, you need to very thoroughly familiarize yourself with the issues around privacy and security. So what happens when you load up the data into the platform you're using? What are the regulations around that? What are the assurances that the vendor provides? What happens to the data during the analysis? Where does it go? What goes where? All of that kind of thing is really important to know about. And also the issue of data retention and what's being done with that data beyond your analytic task. So is the platform that you're using keeping your data or immediately deleting it after the analytic task that you've run on it? Are they using the data that you upload for analysis to train their models? All of those sorts of things are really, really important. And you should be always using a tool that has considered these issues in the context of qualitative research, and also be very familiar with all of the information they provide about that. And some products are providing a lot more information about all of these things than others. So the question, the first question that was in the chat or in the question and answer was to do with the ethics of privacy. And for me, what informed consent means, which is a very familiar term in qualitative research, is fundamentally changed when we start to think about using generative AI because of this fact that we are using a large language model and we are uploading our data in order for that to work. So no longer is it only that we tell our participants and what's happening. We have to allow them to provide their informed consent for the use of large language models as well. And I have seen quite a lot of very worrying examples of qualitative researchers using these technologies without informing, let alone asking research participants what they feel about it. And that's a really worrying trend. So make sure that you are adjusting those standard protocols in light of your potential use of these kinds of tools. So the question in the Q&A, is it only about personally identifiable data? Are all data private, even if it's not identifiable? A really, really good question, I think. And for me, it's not only the personally identifiable data. I mean, we would normally want to be anonymizing our data anyway, even if we weren't using these tools. But we have to think about sensitive topics and those sorts of things as well, which is why I think the informed consent issue is so important. Then another question, which is a very difficult one to answer: can people really consent if we have no idea of the future issues which maybe haven't been thought of yet? Absolutely. That's one of the tricky situations we find ourselves in right at the moment, yes, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But they certainly can't consent if we don't tell them what we're intending to do with their materials. So we have to be open about that side of things also, I think. We also have to trust that what big tech companies and the developers of analysis platforms who are using their technologies, we have to believe that what they tell us that they are or aren't doing with our data is actually true. And I've definitely come across many people who would say, well, these big tech companies, they stole all the data off the internet. Why do we believe that they're not going to use the data that we upload to train their models further? So there's quite a lot of skepticism there about whether we can even trust what they say, given the way that these tools were developed in the first place. So there's a lot to think about there and to unpack. And so for me, I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to is it ethical to upload qualitative materials into these models? It depends on the nature of the data, the project you're working on, and all of that sort of thing. So each project should be thinking about these issues on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so we could absolutely talk about these issues for a lot longer, but I know that many of you are here to think about, okay, what do the tools actually do? So I will move on to that topic now and initially show you a figure from a report that was published by the Market Research Society here in the UK, whereby they give this nice visual overview of their analysis of current use of AI and related topics within research. So this is not specific to qualitative research, but to research more generally. And you can see here, though, that there are lots of tasks like coding, sentiment analysis, and so on, that are relevant to our focus of qualitative research. So these kinds of capabilities are being used for all kinds of different purposes already. And actually the Market Research Society, if you Google that, you'll come very quickly up to this report that's freely downloadable. And there's 3 or 4 reports that they've generated in the last few years around topics related to this, which even if you're not working in the market research context, I think are useful to read and reflect upon, because many of the issues are very similar. But what I want to do is to put this into the context of qualitative research, and to do that by thinking about a typical qualitative research workflow. Now, of course, the actual qualitative research workflow, again, is specific to each project. But here are some sort of high-level, broad phases or stages that are very common to many projects. And what I would like to do today is start to think about how those 5 activities or capabilities I mentioned earlier, generate, converse, summarize, convert, and label, intersect onto these stages or phases of a typical qualitative workflow. And what's most important about this Sankey diagram is not so much where the lines go from and to. In fact, every time I look at this, I think, I could put the lines in slightly different places in some respects. So it's much more about the idea that those 5 capabilities on the right-hand side of my diagram actually go to multiple different potential phases. So the real point of this diagram is to show the broad applicability of the capabilities across the qualitative research workflow. I've just noticed another question in the chat, in the Q&A, that I missed earlier, so I'll just attend to that. What do you think of a stance in which we only use tools that do not train future data, e.g. locally run large language models, are not uploaded data to any tools? That's definitely something that I would feel more comfortable with for many of my qualitative projects. And there's also a movement towards that happening in various places. So in this country, in the UK, where I'm based, Some research organizations, for example, are developing their own models or having them operate offline for those kinds of reasons. And I think that we'll see more and more of that happening as time goes by. Absolutely. There's also a movement towards developing models which are based on research data. So the issue with the open AI models and other similar large language models is that they've been trained on all of the data about all kinds of random things, which have got nothing to do with the application that we put those capabilities to. So whether we'll start to see more models which are generated for bespoke purposes and uses rather than these more general models. So I think we'll see more of that as time goes by. All right, some excellent questions so far. Thank you so much. Do please keep them coming. So what I'm going to do is take each of these and just say a few things about capabilities. So first of all, if we think about designing our research, I'd be very interested, just put yes or no into the chat. Have you used ChatGPT or something similar in the past, whether it's for qualitative research or anything else? I'm expecting to get more yeses than nos, but let's see. Quite a lot of yeses. Okay, type research into the chat if you've used ChatGPT or something similar for a research purpose. So maybe generating an idea for research or something else. Okay, quite a few people, but not successfully, I saw somebody said. Okay, so some people already starting to think about doing that. Okay, so lots and lots of researchers are using these tools for those kinds of purposes. So, for example, you could ask chatbots for ideas for research topics, for published articles on a topic of interest, for potential research questions around a particular topic. To give suggestions for useful populations to draw a sample from and what might be appropriate sampling strategies in the context of that topic. Ideas for collecting qualitative data for such a study, what might be good ways of doing that, and also listing potential interview questions or topic guides or other data collection instruments. So these are just some of the tasks that chatbots are being used for, but also researchers are starting to use them also not only to ask for things, ideas for things, but to ask them to do things. So refining an existing project overview. So maybe you've written a project overview and you're asking a chatbot to refine it, to improve it in some way, or to extend it. What have I missed? This is what I'm planning to do. Is there anything I've missed? And those sorts of things. If you're using chatbots for these kinds of purposes, then of course you need to be asking questions in a way that is going to yield the most useful answers. And that skill is referred to often as prompting. And we'll come back and talk about prompting as a new skill for qualitative researchers in this space later on. But I also wanted to just highlight very briefly today about it's not just the chat bots that we now have available, but we also have tools which have been developed for research purposes. So some of you might have heard of deep research, and actually there are kind of 3 deep research tools coming from different providers, and these are basically ways of generating research. So it's a desk research application whereby the tool will autonomously, off its own back, through a series of multi-step web researching processes, will analyze and synthesize and generate a report based on a question that you provide it. So rather than having a prompt-based conversation as you would in ChatGPT or something similar, in deep research tools, it's actually doing a whole kind of research process for you, and that has a desk research application. If you're interested in that, of course, what it's doing is it's gathering all of that information from the internet and bringing it together and collating it for you based on the question prompts that you provide. And many people think it's highly unfortunate that that OpenAI, Google, and others are using the same name, Deep Research, for their separate tools, but that's the way it is. But there is a useful blog here. Once you get hold of the PDF, you can click on there and read the difference between the three of them if you're interested in that. So that's just two different ways of thinking about using chatbots and these deep research tools for ideation, getting ideas for our research design. Then we've got the literature reviewing process, which of course in qualitative projects is often a very integral part of the workflow. And we're starting to see generative AI add-ins to existing reference managers. And also bespoke AI tools, which will find and summarize literature. There's just a few examples there. There are many, many, many others. Again, be really interested to hear if anybody's used any of these new AI tools for literature reviewing. Pop it into the chat, the name of the tools if you have been using any of them. But here I've got a screenshot of one site, and the other day I went there and I just asked it to generate a literature review about developing effective strategies for addressing different types of bullying in UK schools, and off it goes and looks for all of the references and generates a written literature review based on that, giving information about the references and also the search strategy. Now, you may have heard lots of examples of when AI is generating fictitious citations and those sorts of things. In my experience, if you use a general purpose tool like ChatGPT, you're going to get more hallucinations in that respect than when you use one of these more bespoke tools. And I think that's probably one of my key messages coming out of today's session, is to be using tools which are designed for particular purposes is usually going to be particularly useful, rather than just using a general purpose tool. Okay, so I saw a few other names of literature reviewing tools up here, and also some discussion about hallucination. One of the things that you have to be really clear about is the hallucination. Hallucination, if you're not aware, refers to the idea that models may make up information. So if a model doesn't know the answer to a question you pose, it may just make up the answer rather than say that it doesn't know the answer. And that is definitely a problem with general purpose tools. But of course, you should definitely always be checking your references, not just accepting what it's telling you. So using it to assist in the literature reviewing process, if you're going to go down that route, rather than just avoiding doing any work yourself. I'm really interested to hear any thoughts that you have about what you lose by not doing a literature review in the more traditional way. Are there any thoughts from people about that? The struggle learning, grappling with the literature. Yeah, feel free to unmute. Synthesizing information helps. That looked like a good comment. There's so many of you, there's so many comments. There's lots of really great comments coming up in the chat. I think you can all save the chat at the end if you're finding other people's comments really helpful. You miss the serendipitous, absolutely. And also the accumulation of that knowledge by not reading and thinking carefully, and just having some AI tool just say, oh, this is all the useful stuff. Okay, it's a lot quicker, but it might not be such high quality. And you also don't have all of that accumulated knowledge in your mind that you can take forward to the rest of your project. So always be thinking critically. So I think it's very easy to fall into the hype of what AI can potentially do, which is often being sold to us as time saving, but also as being able to look at more information and find things that we might miss. But always be asking yourself, what am I losing by using this tool, as well as what am I gaining by using this tool? And if you don't know the work of Trina Paulus and colleagues, then I'd highly recommend that you find that you read their work, because they talk about the consequences of our use of technology, and that there are always consequences. And so having in your mind, what am I losing? What am I gaining all the time as you're making decisions about tools and as you're using tools, I think is really, really important, because you are losing something as well as gaining something. Jess, I don't know whether you can dig out the reference for Trina Paulus's article on consequences of technology. I've got it on my computer somewhere, so I'll find it at the end of the session if you haven't got easy access to it yourself. Oh, already there. Wow, fabulous. Great. Thank you so much. Okay, let's move on then. And think about data collection. Have any of you thought about using large language models to help with the data collection or data generation process? Give me a yes or a no. Not yet. Type the word worried in the chat if you think the idea that you can get a model to create data for a qualitative project is a problem. Deeply worried, some of you. Super worried. Okay. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit. Okay. There's two sort of things to think about here. One is using AI to help gather data from humans. So we can program an AI bot basically to gather, to do an interview or to do focus groups or something on our behalf. And that can happen via a tool like WhatsApp or via a speaking bot. And there's different opinions about whether this is a useful thing to do. So lots of people say, oh, well, that's not so authentic. And, we're not going to get such good quality qualitative materials if we have a bot doing the interviewing. Other people would say, well, there might be some groups of participants or topics that they actually feel more comfortable and more easy to talk to a AI bot rather than an actual human. So again, for me, the more I've thought about this and experimented with the tools, if you go to the Qualia website, then you can have a go at being interviewed by a speaking bot and get a sense of how that feels as a participant. But it is something that's happening more and more, probably more in sort of market research sectors rather than more academic research. But it's certainly something not to dismiss out of hand. It might well be that there are certain, as I said, topics or groups of participants who would feel more comfortable being interviewed in that way. So you can argue both ways. So another example of appropriateness The other example here is the idea of actually creating what's referred to as silicone or synthetic data. So the idea that you can ask a chatbot, let's imagine I was doing a project about, well, that example I had from the previous slide about generating a literature review about bullying in schools. Okay, I could ask ChatGPT or whatever to generate 20 transcripts of interviews with students and teachers at a school that's in a particular location, and it will come up with transcripts, and you can give all kinds of prompts to focus looking at, generating responses which would be seen as being typical. And that's one thing that is happening in some spaces. I'm very interested to hear an adjective in the chat that is your response to the idea that we might do that in a project. Yikes. That's a good one. OMG. I've used chatbots to generate synthetic quantitative data tables for use in data analysis teaching purposes. Absolutely. So that's a really good application. So we can use these kinds of tools as teachers to generate synthetic data around a particular topic that might be of interest in order to teach how to do qualitative analysis. And I think that's one really powerful application of this this capability as well. And one of my colleagues, Steve Wright, who I've done quite a lot of work with around these topics, he talks about a student having done this in order to learn how to do qualitative analysis as well. So not only teachers doing it, but students, rather than having to go through all of the ethics, IRB and everything in order to generate a small amount of data from real people to learn how to do a qualitative research project. The idea is, okay, well, we could generate synthetic data, and although that's not the answer, at least we can go through the process of learning how to do a qualitative analysis project. So there are some things to think about that as well, but clearly not appropriate in all contexts, right? And I think that's another really powerful example of that. Then there's the idea of AI personas. So Ipsos UK, which is a research organisation here in the United Kingdom, who do a lot of the election polls over here when we have a general election. For our last general election in July last year, 2024, they generated AI personas in order to understand behaviour of the electorate. And they gave a webinar actually on how and why they did that and what they learned from that process. So if you're interested in that, you might want to check out that webinar. So those are just some examples of what's happening in the generative AI space in terms of data collection. I'm going to have to save this chat and read it later because there's so much stuff going on that I really want to look at. But for now, I'm going to keep going. Don't forget, if you've got an actual question that you want me to answer, if you pop that into the Q&A space rather than the chat, then I'll see that a little bit more easily. Then what we've also got is transcription. So I'm liking all of these chat-based adjectives. I want you to put an adjective into the chat that captures what you think when you think about doing transcription yourself. Terrible, tedious. We should do a sentiment analysis on all your responses. Time consuming. Fun, question mark. I quite like transcribing personally, but maybe not all of my data. Okay, there's definitely something about transcription that we would like to be solved, yes? And I'm sure many of you are aware that the field of automated transcription has significantly changed in the last few years. So I used to say, You know, by the time that you've checked and corrected a transcript that's been generated by an automated tool, you haven't really saved yourself very much time. So the reason to use them isn't really time saving. That's changed. They are now much more accurate. They are now much quicker. And we basically have three genres of transcription tools. We have the general purpose transcription tools like Otter AI, and there are dozens and dozens of them. Then we have auto transcription as part of data collection. So a Zoom or a Teams meeting like this can now generate a transcript automatically. And also we have transcription via qualitative data analysis tools. So NVivo, MaxQA, Quercus, Transana, and also Atlas TI now have their own bespoke transcription tools that you can either use within the platform itself or as a standalone option. And again, in my experience, even though all of these are getting better all of the time, the bespoke ones tend to be more accurate and formatted in more useful ways and have some kind of research tools embedded within them. For example, transcribing the pauses or the ums and ers and all of that kind of thing that you might want in a qualitative transcript. And some of them have different models that you can choose from. So Transana, for example, that you can choose whether you want to use one of three models based on whether you prize the accuracy of the transcript, the speed with which it's generated, or the security of your data. And one option with Transana is to have transcripts auto created without the data, the audio or the video leaving your own computer. So that will be slower, but much more secure. So those transcription tools which are being developed within the qualitative space tend to have those sorts of considerations much more centrally embedded within them. So I think somebody's saying on the in the chat there are whisper-based tools that allow you to do that. Yeah. Okay. There's a question coming up in the Q&A about IRB. I'd be very interested to hear others' thoughts on that, and I'll come back to that a little bit later if that's okay. For now, what I want to do is move on to the next four kind of general phases: familiarize, categorize, analyze, and interpret, which for me are the kind of core formal analytic phases of a qualitative project, although we're making analytic decisions all the time. But these are the genres of tools I want to talk about. So we've got integrations into existing tools. So the integration of generative AI capabilities into existing tools. And the ones I've got listed up there are existing qualitative software tools that have started to do this already. So Atlas TI, MaxQA, NVivo, Qualcoda, and WordStat. And then new apps. I've just got a few there, but there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of new apps, online apps, that have become available in the last couple of years, which are harnessing generative AI capabilities solely in the context of doing qualitative analysis. And I'm going to talk about a few of those in a minute. What I'm not really going to talk about very much today is AI writing tools. I'm sure you're aware that you can use generative AI to help with writing. There are some bespoke writing tools, and we can also use chatbots as well. But I'm going to focus the rest of my attention today on the AI tools for qualitative analysis. But I just want you to notice at the bottom left of this slide that term qualitative deepfake. Which is my way of describing the reality that it is now, and has been for a while, possible to do a whole qualitative research project from start to finish using generative AI with minimal or even no human intervention. And the implication and the risk that that has on our profession as qualitative researchers is really something important that we need to not only be aware of, but think about how we're going to handle as a community of practice. Okay, there's one question in the Q&A. Is there a tool that can transcribe local language interviews in English? So languages is really interesting, because unfortunately, English language is served best in these kinds of tools than any other language in the world. So not all languages are equally well developed in terms of transcription tools. Some transcription tools have translation tools embedded within them. So you could have the AI transcribe in the local language and then have the AI to translate that into another language. Doesn't have to be English, can be another language, but that depends on tools. So some tools have that, different languages better served than others, but definitely not all languages in the world are equally well served, although it is getting better. And also accents is something to consider, because some accents are better understood by AI than others. So it might be in your specific context that you still have some issues related to that. And I think Jess has just put a useful article on tools in the chat. So thank you for that. So I think the question there from Margaret about automatic translation tools, I think I probably answered that, but let me know, Margaret, if you've got
I think you've largely covered it. So we're working a lot with community co-researchers at the moment. So one of our issues is where we're doing, say, walking interviews. We have got, I mean, in terms of our budget, right, for transcription, you know, how expensive it is if you're using, I don't know, Pashto or something. So we're asking people who've got good English to also do a summary. So they send us the recording, but they're also sending us an English summary. And in some cases, it can be very short. And it's like they're clearly missing things. So I'd like to be able to find a way, instead of paying whatever, £4 a minute or something, to run some of those transcripts through. Some are excellent, but it still be helpful to be able to double check some way on accuracy.
Yeah. So I think that's getting better all the time, Margaret. But I do think you need to test a few tools to see which ones work best for different, for whatever the translation languages are that you need, because they're not all equal.
So I was just wondering if you had any recommendations of particularly good ones.
Not for translation, I'm afraid. Translation is not really my main area of specialism.
Okay, thanks. So at the moment, what we're trying to do, just throwing it in if it's of any interest, is obviously some of them we're actually getting other people, we're paying them to, you know, retranslate and look back. But then we're also trying a sample to just look, for example, I don't know, on Google Translate, take a snippet from translation and then look back and see how it comes out against the transcript or how it's said. But it's not ideal. So we're just playing with that at the moment, but it's just eating through my budget, as you can imagine.
Yeah, there is a translation tool that I've used before for a research project a few years ago, but I can't remember what it is called off the top of my head. But feel free to email me afterwards, Margaret, and I'll see if I can remember and send you any info I've got. But my understanding is that Google Translate's not as good as some of the.
No, it wasn't. We just tried just to do a double check, and someone did send me a link for another one I can't remember our project manager's looking at, which is supposed to be more accurate. But again, if anyone else has got other suggestions, that'd be great. And thank you. We will email.
No worries. Okay, I'm going to move on and talk a little bit more specific. I'm aware that I've been talking already for quite a long time. So I want to just move on for a little bit. I know there's a couple more questions, but I'm just going to keep going for a bit further before I attend to some more questions. So thinking about the qualitative analysis space, so just going back here, this area here, familiarize, categorize, analyze, interpret. Let's think about tools for those kinds of purposes in a bit more detail. And there's basically 4 genres, okay? There's general purpose tools, okay, which I mentioned previously. And then there's 3 genres of tools which are created for the purposes of qualitative data analysis. And it's these that I would lean towards myself, because they've got some programming embedded in them that are related to our needs as qualitative analysts, whereas the general purpose ones don't. I'm not going to talk about bespoke in-house tools today, but this is just to highlight the fact that there are various different organizations which are now starting to develop their own suite of tools, and you will probably know of many in your own local countries. In the UK, Ipsos and also the government are starting to develop in-house tools for civil servants to use for various different applications. But what I'm going to focus on, which is more relevant to those of us not working in those contexts, is the integrations into established qualitative software programs and some new online applications. So just taking those two, let's break those down by giving you a table which will almost certainly be out of date within the next few days or weeks, because these tools are developing all of the time. But at the moment, we have Atlas TI, MaxQDA, QualCoder, NVivo, and very recently WordStat, and coming soon QDA Minor, that are established qualitative software packages. You can see the first date is when they originally became available as tools, and the second date is when they started to incorporate generative AI. And most of these here, these four here, have some similarities, but also some differences. I'm going to take you through each of these and show you some examples in a moment. WordStat came out very recently with its generative AI implementation, which it's done in quite a different way. And I haven't mapped that on this diagram for today's session. And they are intending to bring in some capabilities for QDA Minor, which will be more equivalent, I think, although I don't know, to these, because QDA Minor is the qualitative module that comes from Provalis Research in Canada, who develops both of these tools. WordStat is a text mining tool, so the implication of generative AI is a bit different from what we see here. And then on the right-hand side, I've listed the 5 new apps that I know best, but there are literally loads of others, and there may be some that you know that are not on that list, but they have capabilities as well. Remember, these are generative AI only. Okay, and so the most important thing about this comparative chart is the lack of coding in those new apps. So give me a yes in the chat if you normally do qualitative coding when you analyze your materials. I haven't yet seen any no's, which is unsurprising to me, because coding is the bedrock of how many, not all, but many, most probably, qualitative analysis methods employ coding. And so the fact that these new online applications, which are harnessing generative AI, have no coding is potentially changing the way that we may be doing qualitative analysis in the future. And some methodologists and developers are saying that this is constituting a paradigm shift in terms of how we're going to be doing qualitative analysis in the future. So that's something to be aware of. There's a blog post on the CAQDAS blog actually that talks about that fairly recently. The question that Vanessa asks in the chat about the privacy and consent concerns. So they are, depending on which of these you're using, they have agreements with the engine that they're using around what happens with the data. And you definitely need to read all of that privacy and security information on those websites. Some of them are more detailed in the information they give you about that than others. But yes, they are all making some kind of assurances about that, but you need to look at that in detail and make sure that that maps up with the requirements of your institution and your IRB and so on. Some of them meet GDPR and HIPAA, some of them only one or the other, so it depends on the tools. But that's really, I think, your responsibility as an organisation or an individual researcher to fully understand that based on the tool that you're thinking of using. Okay, I'm going to now, with the last little bit of time we have, show you a few applications of summaries and explanations, coding, and chatting. So these are the specific capabilities across those integrations into established tools and the new apps. So I'm going to start off thinking a little bit about summaries. And so with summaries, we can have auto summaries or user generated summaries, or not user generated, user instigated summaries. So this is an example from Coloop, which was one of the new apps, which when you upload either a written transcript or an audio that it then will transcribe, it will automatically create 2 summaries for you without even asking. So this is an example of the beginnings of a transcript with somebody called Ken about volunteering, and it automatically will give a thematic summary based on the whole of that transcript. And it will also give what it calls a QA, question answer summary, which is like a high level conversational summary saying, okay, the facilitator asked this, the respondents asked that. This is actually a QA summary from a focus group transcript rather than an interview. That happens just automatically by virtue of bringing the data into the app. In most of the established CAQDAS packages, you as a user have to initiate a summary. This is an example of a document summary that's initiated on a transcript in NVivo for an interview participant named Barbara, and the summary is presented in a separate memo, which is a little bit different from what we saw in Coloop. In Coloop, you can see in this previous slide, we can have the summary sitting adjacent to the actual source material, whereas in NVivo they're slightly disconnected because they're in 2 separate places. In Atlas TI, we can generate a summary based on codes, and so this is an example. So here's a code called management, which has got some data already coded at it, and we can ask the AI to summarize the code. So this is not looking at one piece of data. This is looking at little bits of data related to a code and looking across multiple data files and summarizing based on that code. Another example of user initiated summaries are segment summaries in MaxQDA. So you can select a segment of as whatever size you want and have a summary generated there as well. Okay, so those are just some examples. What I'm not doing today is showing you every possible capability in every tool. I've just picked out a few differences just to show you a few different tools. But there are some differences in how they implement things. One thing that's different in the online apps tends to be the comparative element at the moment. So this is an example from Tailwind, which is a new online app which is currently in beta, which comes from MaxQDA. And here we've got summaries. This is a literature review, actually. These are literature files around my topic of bullying. And here we've got comparative summaries. So rather than a separate summary for a particular code or a document, we've got them comparatively. And the new apps tend to have the comparative aspect embedded in the interface much more clearly than the established CAQDAS packages at the moment. So that's just a few examples of summaries. We've also got explaining terms. So you can also ask the AI to give you an explanation of a term. So this is from NVivo, actually. MaxQDA and NVivo do this at the moment. So here, I didn't know what this term dingbatters meant. And I asked the AI to give me a definition. And actually, this is an example of a hallucination. So if you read this, and you can look at this in more detail in your own time, but the context within which the term dingbatters is used, I do not believe is the same definition here. So that's an example of something to be a little bit aware of. But as a sense checker for terms that you don't know, that can be useful as long as you remember that you need to go and double check things afterwards. So I see explaining as a form of summarization in some respects. If you're thinking about summaries, then I would highly recommend, in the context of our thinking about appropriate uses, that you ask yourself a number of methodological considerations. So here I've just listed a few questions to ask yourself, and then not really the answers, but because I think the answers are based on the specificities of each project, but giving you a few things to think about. So before you get into actually using these kinds of capabilities, hopefully this slide will be helpful for you. So I'll move on then and think a little bit about coding. So there's basically a few things to think about. Are you considering using generative AI to suggest codes to you or actually apply codes to the data? Those are quite different things. What's the extent of the guidance that you as a human want to give the AI to implement the coding? And what's the breadth and the speed of the coding? So these three elements differ somewhat according to tool. So here's an example of AI generated code suggestions in MaxQDA. So you can select some text and then have the AI suggest codes. And here you can see that MaxQDA suggests codes in 3 different groups. Thematic codes, which tend to be the most descriptive, and the most sort of based on the explicit content, probably. The alternative thematic codes tend to be a bit more analytical, and the interpretive ones even more. So they're getting a little bit less content based the further you go down. Here they have potential definitions in this explanation column, and you can pick and choose the ones that you think are relevant, if you think any of them are. And if you choose some, then it will create those codes in your coding scheme and apply those codes to the text. So from the code suggestions, you can get coding done, but that's quite slow. Yes, that's quite step by step. We can also have code suggestions in MaxQDA and NVivo at the moment, generated from an existing code. In MaxQDA, we can't get coding done as a result, but here we have a code. So I've already created a code, and then I'm asking the AI to suggest subcodes based on the data that's already at that code. And here you get some examples, and the examples are in a memo, and then you then need to decide, okay, now I might use those suggestions to go and look at the data myself and do some more coding. So that's very suggestive only. NVivo has something similar, but as well as giving you the suggestions, it's giving you examples from the data that fit into that suggestion. And if you like the suggestion, you can have the AI implement that coding based on the subcodes. So some quite big differences just stemming from the code suggestion functionality. Then we've got the actual coding, and there's some big differences here. So Atlas TI has the fastest and broadest coding at the moment across one or multiple documents. MaxQDA is much more step-by-step, much more directed, and I'll show you what that means in a moment. Here's an example of automated AI coding from Atlas TI, when I can select as many data files as I want, and it will generate usually a lot of codes. So here it found 344 codes from that list of 8 transcripts, I think, and that I then need to look through and decide whether I want. So I can see the quotations, the extracts of data that it thinks might be relevant to each code, but there's a lot of reviewing and thinking and deciding about whether it's useful, and 344 is a lot to go through. I can reduce the number of categories. A category in Atlas TI is a top level code with the subcodes underneath. I can reduce the number. So here I reduced it to 10, but I've still got the same number of codes. They're just collapsed into fewer categories. So I've got a lot of work to refine that and decide what to do with it. And the AI coding in Atlas TI happens at the paragraph level, so each paragraph has multiple codes associated with it. So that's the fully inductive AI coding. We also have in Atlas TI what they call intentional AI coding, when I can start as a human to say, okay, don't just go and do all the coding. Do the coding based on my areas of interest. So that might be research questions or topics. So you can give some context here about your project. You can give a lot more than what I've put here. And it turns that context into questions that it then uses as the basis of a code category. So that's a much more focused way of employing the coding. But what's happening with the coding needs to be something to think very carefully. And again, what are you losing by not coding yourself? What are you gaining? Always be able to answer that question. In MaxQDA, it's very, very different. At the moment, you employ AI coding in a very deductive way. So you have to start off with a code. So my code was a code that I named altruism. And then you have to give the code a definition, which you can see my definition here. This is actually quite a short definition. You can create a lot more information and context and instructions in the definition, which is acting as the prompt. And then you can ask it to look at one data file at a time. Could be an interview transcript as here, or could be a literature file or anything that's text. And the AI will go and find segments that it thinks match up with your definition, and then give you an explanation. So what the rationale is basically for why that segment relates to that. So that's much more slower, but much more of your human intervention in the coding process. So some very different ways that AI coding has been implemented. Again, I'm not going to go through them today because I'm running out of time, but you've got the slides. You can have a look at these and think about the when, why, and how to use AI coding in your workflow. In the new apps, we can have the AI identify themes automatically, and that can happen in a variety of different ways. Here I've just contrasted 2 of the new apps. There are many more, of course, but you can have a go at thinking about those. But that theme generation can happen entirely automatically, or can happen focused by prompting in a similar way that I mentioned earlier. This is what AI Lies looks like, and these are themes that have been generated automatically in my volunteering data, and then it gives you summaries of the themes. It gives you quotes. These are live reference links that give you the evidence coming from the actual data. And then you can also get some frequency analysis and various other things. And that's happening in a much more automated way in some of the new apps. Another new app, Reveal, will generate your topics, it calls them, rather than themes, based on your research questions and a few other things, and then give you a comparative view. So you ask a question. Here's a very simple question: what motivates participants to start volunteering? And it gives me a study level analysis. So it's automatically looking through all of the data that I've loaded up and gives me similarities based on the participants, and then the differences, and then it gives me one by one contrasting each participant. So the analytic focus there is the participant rather than the transcript, and that means if you've got focus group data, then that can be really useful as a participant-based analysis. One last screenshot here. This is cohort, so rather than looking at individual participants, we can tag our data according to cohorts. So just a very similar male-female thing, but you can have as many different cohorts going along there, and then you can ask questions not just by any participant, but according to different cohorts. So those are just a few examples. This is a thematic map in Reveal, and it gives you a sense of how much of the data 100% that this theme occurs in, whereas this theme is only occurring in 26% of the data, and so on. So you're getting a little bit of that kind of overview. Okay, very, very quickly, because I have super run out of time, I'm just going to show you what the chat looks like. So in Atlas TI, you have chat here. This is the online version of Atlas TI, and you can see that the interface is very similar to what you're used to in ChatGPT. The big difference is that you're chatting with your data only. Okay, so you're using the large language model is understanding your data, but the response which is coming back in answer to your question is based on what's in your data. And that's really important to understand. In Atlas TI, you can chat across multiple transcripts at the same time and see all of that chat in various different ways. And there's quite good integration with other tools. In MaxQDA, you can chat with one document at a time rather than multiple documents at the time. And one of the reasons why MaxQDA has done that is because of the context window. I don't know if you've heard of that, but the context window in large language models is the idea that the model can only handle so much data in one go. And therefore, MaxQDA have put some restrictions on how much data you can upload in one go in order to try to ensure that the responses you get are most useful. But the key analytic difference in MaxQDA is, as well as chatting with an individual document, you can chat with coded segments. So here I'm chatting with segments related to one code across multiple transcripts. And so what that basically means is that in MaxQDA, you have a difference between what they call case, or what I think of as case-based conversing, one document at a time, if you think about a document as a case, and theme-based conversing if you're chatting with coded segments. I'm going to finish off with my last slide here, which shows you something similar in CoLoop, but in that comparative way. So I realize I've reached the end of my allotted time. There are a few more slides that you can go through, mainly related to prompting and the idea that you have to generate skills in prompting, but I'll stop talking there and see if there are any final questions that I ought to attend to. I apologize for having too much to say in the time given to me. Jess, were there any particular questions that you think I haven't?
In the Q&A, there's a question about implied meaning, which I think also Paul had talked about in the chat about how it knows what your research question is, I think is kind of related to the idea of what is the outcome. I wondered if you just wanted to maybe speak a little bit about, like, you're showing lots of useful tools, but the relationship between with kind of your outcome of your research and what is this telling you in regards to your research question?
Yeah, so I think there's several things to say about that topic. One is to remember what the large language model is and how it works and what it can actually do. Okay. And the idea that in qualitative analysis, we are interpreting meaning of the data, and to what extent can large language models do that? And so there's quite a lot of hype coming from certain places saying, you know, large language models are intelligent, they can do all of this stuff. But actually, we need to be questioning whether that's really true. Because what they're doing is looking at the form of the data and using the predictive model to generate a response based on a statistical probability, which is not the same as us reading some text and deciding what that means in the context of our research questions and our just overall knowledge of our topics, and also, as you rightly say, Jess, the outcomes of our projects. And for me, that relates not only to what is interpretation. I think these new tools give us the opportunity to have that conversation again. What does it mean to interpret in qualitative studies? And is that just about, you know, content level? They're much better, large language models, at content level responses than they are at reading between the lines. And also the idea that somebody might say something here in a transcript, which relates back to something I know about what they said previously, and the large language model is not going to be very good at picking out that kind of thing. So there's all of those sorts of things. But the other response to those kinds of comments for me is to do with what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? So are we using AI to avoid doing something that historically we would have done? So to replace our historical analytic tasks, or are we using the AI to assist us with those tasks? And I think that discourse between replacing or assisting is really, really important. And most of the researchers who have done a lot of experimentation with these kinds of tools are saying it doesn't replace, it can only assist. And so therefore, if you see hype online around, oh, you can do your qualitative analysis in 3 minutes, we don't need qualitative researchers anymore, that's not coming from a space of understanding of what qualitative research actually is and what we try to achieve with it. So for me, I think those sorts of points are all to do with what's the place of this in our projects.
Thank you. That's such an important point. We are at 12:33, so I think we should probably wrap up, but I just want to make sure that you saw all the comments in the chat. Thanking you for this this presentation. It's been great, and I want to thank everyone who's still here.